welcome to this new episode of Policy Square by Primus Partners. Today's guest needs no introduction. Dr. Mukesh Aghi is President and CEO of the USISPF, a person well known the world over in pushing U.S. India relationship, a well known person in corporations, has led major companies like L&T in India and IBM across the world, and bestowed with a number of awards. The JRD Leadership Award, Government of India has honored him with the Pravasi Bharati Saman. But what is little known about him is that he's an avid mountaineer and a marathon. And I think, Dr. Aghi, you're the right person as a marathon expert and as a mountaineer to lead forward this charge of the U.S. India Strategic Partnership.
Thank you.
So very fortunate to have you leading this engagement between the two countries, and very welcome to Primus Policy Square. So also congratulations on a major achievement this year. The United States became India's largest trading partner.
Absolutely.
And that's a changing global, changing dynamic. So how do you see this going forward? What are your first off views on this?
Well, first, it's a pleasure to see you and a pleasure to be on the show. I think the U.S.-India relationship is the most important relationship for 21st century. This has been stated by President Obama. So did Trump state that. So did President Biden. You have to look at this relationship from multiple angles. One is geopolitical. We are living in an age where the current order is being challenged by China. While we all live under the guidelines of that order, China would like to dictate its own. And the biggest challenge India has is because it has border disputes with China, it is going to push India dramatically. From that perspective, India needs friends to deal with this issue, and the United States becomes a friend. The second aspect is the opportunity for India. China was a manufacturing hub for the global. With the COVID issue and China's assertive approach to changing the world order, what we are seeing is every boardroom in the US and Europe is asking the question, how do we de-risk our supply chain? And India becomes a natural place for them to explore. And in fact, today we have Tim Cook in New Delhi. Apple is basically going to produce roughly 20 million iPhone 14 in 2024, almost 7% of their global production. And that number keeps on going up. So I think from a geopolitical perspective, from an economic perspective, and then people to people, we have around 5 million Indian Americans in the US, double the average income of an American itself. Biden has positioned 150 of those Indian Americans in his administration. He has nominated Ajay Banga as president of the World Bank. So I think in every aspect, the relationship is getting cemented more and more and then stronger and stronger.
I agree with you, Mukesh. If one looks at the last 2 decades of U.S.-India strategic partnership, and if I start from the times of the Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, and the next steps of strategic partnership foundation that was laid, and that carried on by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and now so effectively being pushed by Prime Minister Modi, I think these two large democracies have proved that they are natural partners going forward, and I think present a method of taking populations and regions along in a great march of progress, which is equitable, which doesn't threaten anybody, but at the same time takes everybody along. So I think you're absolutely right. But jumping right into one thought that came to my mind from what you said. So there is this clear interest of leveraging supply chains. The fact that India has a huge amount of capacity, technical capacity, a very fine system of companies, management, the legality around it, India doing a huge amount of work and the ease of doing business. So how do you think we leverage forward in technology partnerships, in particularly the light of the technology partnership that has now been set up between the two countries? What do you think is needed by American companies to take this momentum forward?
Well, see, you have to look at American company's perspective. One is they're looking for competitive, efficient production of their goods so they can sell around the world. And the reason they went to China was definitely the cost and scalability. They're looking at India also from that perspective. And I think India needs to sit down with some of these companies and say, tell us, just like they did with Apple, set up a PLI scheme so they can be globally competitive, they can make the same amount of margins. So it's important that there's a dialogue, conversation continues with these companies because each company may have a different set of requirement. And I'm not saying make policy individually, make policy broader and let these companies adjust to that environment. The second aspect, so that means ease of doing business has to get better. And we need to benchmark ourselves not within states. We need to benchmark ourselves with Singapore. We need to benchmark ourselves with Finland. You know, world-class environment for doing business. That's one. The second is infrastructure. In our analysis, it showed while from a tax perspective, from a wages perspective, India was, same as China or better. But when it became into logistics supply chain, the cost of moving goods was 20% higher. So that means we need to keep on improving the infrastructure, be it ports, airports, or railways, or highways itself. That will play a pivotal role in making these companies much more efficient in a global supply chain. The third factor I see is basically giving them a level market playing field. It is important if you are going to be an export nation, if you are going to be a global economy of $5 or $10 trillion, we need to bring in competition. It has to be a global competition. That means a level playing field for these folks itself. Things have improved. When I look back 10 years or 5 years itself, India has made a lot of progress. But I think for us to be a global leader in every aspect, we need to make sure that we compete globally itself.
I think that's a very good message to take, Mukesh. I think, and I think policymakers in India will listen to what you are saying so effectively. That one phase of the ease of doing business was comparison within the country. But now we need to aggressively sort of move forward to phase two, where we actually trying to see what the rest of the world is doing and then beat them at that game.
Correct.
There's no doubt about that. I think that's a very good message. In terms of infrastructure, as you know, it's a longish story. Great improvements in the last 5-7 years. Also, clear exhibition of commitment by the government in this budget. The largest ever capex plan for infrastructure is put in place across roads, rail, ports, airports, and telecom sector, 5G, and all that. So I think these are two very good messages for all our audiences to hear. And I could have said it better. Thank you so much for that. I also think that India has got this talented pool of youngsters, and they've got a lot of ideas. Clearly, that's why we are now one of the startup nations of the world, and the United States, of course, has always led that, right from the East Coast to the West Coast, doing fabulous things in pharma and IT and etc. So, how do you think we can come together in taking these lessons from each other? This huge market in India, this huge talent, young people talking about startups, and then a very well-developed American investment system which is capable of taking risks, and how the two come together, to move forward in startup and innovation and take this ahead.
The startups from India are becoming global, but I think we need to give them a bridge to become much more global. There are issues of investment, there are issues on access to the market, and there are issues on taxation. For example, we have now angel tax. That kind of kills the startups. Why can't startups go IPO and raise capital in NASDAQ and other geographies? Why they have to be in the Indian market itself? We need to look at those more carefully. But more important is how do we get them cheap capital from the US into India? I mean, you have the PEs are holding roughly $2+ trillion capital, which is lying idle. They need to leverage. India becomes that place. Finally, once you have a good idea, a good startup, how do you give them access to Fortune 500 companies? So those are the issues we're trying to tackle. And you know, we have taken a dozen of these companies from India, and their valuations have shot up in billions of dollars. And it's a win-win. So for every startup we've taken to the US, for every person they hire, with the average salary in the US of $175,000, they add 8 people in India also. So it's a win-win for both countries, and they're able to bring very cost-effective solutions to the US market. So I think startup is a critical area. We should explore that and support it.
Yeah, so one of the sort of building blocks of startup has always been e-commerce. That's how easy access to market and thoughts is available. There has been a lot of conversation on e-commerce regulations. India realizes the fact that e-commerce and logistics was what kept it alive during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So with that realization, could you share what is the perspective of large e-commerce giants out of the US, and what could India do better to make it easy for them to operate in regulatory space, etc.?
Well, I think you have a population of 1.4 billion people. The retail segment is fragmented, and the infrastructure is limited. The cost of real estate is very, very high. So you need to be able to provide world-class services to consumer. It is important we leverage e-commerce more and more itself. What these companies are saying is, again, we need a level playing field. We need transparency in policy making, and we need predictability. You know, I'll come and spend billions of dollars, and you change the laws, that has an impact on my future investment also. Now, India is saying, that's fine, we'll work on that. But make sure that when you come in, don't kill my retail small-time SMEs also, because you got to maintain their jobs. So think about how do you basically integrate them into your own supply chain, so it's a win-win for everybody. So I think both sides have to find that balance to take this forward.
Right. So I think there have been a number of interventions, stakeholder consultations. Some things have happened, some things are in progress. So this is a bit of a journey that's going on in both sides, finding a sense of comfort and taking forward, and they see value in each other. As I was coming, I was just thinking that, if I was ChatGPT, what I would ask you. So you're coming to the important, conversations around artificial intelligence, and I think both countries being very good in technology and information services and software. How do you think we can both collaborate, better in taking the best out of AI for both our people and our countries?
That's a discussion I had last couple of days with the leadership in Delhi, because you have an opportunity which can become a threat if not handled right. So it is critical that both countries early on, from a policymaker perspective, start having some conversation to having common guidelines, common barriers also, to make sure that we don't go in the wrong direction with the AI. India has tremendous resources to build on the AI, whereas US has fantastic algorithm on the AI side. So if you just merge those algorithms with the data we have of 1.4 billion people, you can come some fantastic solution which will be win-win. But I think it's important the policymakers on both sides sit down and discuss as to how they can put certain fences around it so it does not become a threat to the society.
Mukesh, you've been president for IBM in India, and you're still in touch with a major leader of this space, and we've been aware of the conversations around data protection and data on onshoring within India. There's a new data protection bill. It addresses some parts, but stakeholders are still in conversation about what more is to be done. So what is the view of sort of American industry in regard to how do we do data protection? As you yourself said, I mean, some of the largest public data initiatives now lie in India in terms of population numbers, and a great possibility of scalability for the rest of humanity in Africa and a number of other places. So what is your view on what do we need to do in our data protection, which encourages a greater cooperation and conversation while maintaining, of course, the sensitivities involved in the topic?
See, a stagnant data has no value. A dynamic data drives solutions. And we cannot balkanize data. We live in a global world. The moment you start balkanizing it, you start losing the value of the data itself. So I think it's important that we look at how we maintain a dynamic data at the same time protecting the interest of the country and citizens also, because the transition into the next phase, every individual's data is their asset, and they need to be able to make a decision as to how they're going to let the data go as a market, as a research, or any testing ground also. Also, we need to look at data from a national security perspective. That doesn't mean that you basically say, hey, every data is a national security issue. So we need to be able to, and I think the new bill looks at these issues, looks at countries where they can share the data also. So I think, from my perspective, it's important that we keep that in mind as we move forward the bill also. I know this government has gone through extensive consultation. They basically threw away the old bill, which was, I thought, redundant itself. The new one is much more encouraging, and there'll be more fine-tuning as we move forward.
Thank you so much for your thoughts, Mukesh. As always, it's a wonderful pleasure to meet you. Whenever I meet you, there are I see those thoughts going around in your head, and I think it will be great for our listeners, and a number of our policymakers are also our listeners, and they'll factor in these ideas going forward, and I look forward to meeting you again.
Well, thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.